Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Kurot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at a classic slasher supernatural horror film from 1984, and I'm talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, A Nightmare on Elm Street runs for 1 hour and 31 minutes long. It is directed by the legendary late great Wes Craven. Yes, indeed. Of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street is Wes Craven's baby. Even though he did not direct or had any kind of collaboration with the sequel, but eventually, as time went on, you know, with Dream Warriors and Dream Master and all the other ones, Wes Craven did have some involvement in any of the projects. But here, of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street is Wes Craven's child. And, well, he's done other stuff too besides A Nightmare on Elm Street. He also did The Hills Have Eyes in the late 70s. But I think this movie really put Wes Craven on the map. Or at least got him a lot more recognition. He not only directed the film, but he also wrote the script. It was produced by Robert Shaye. It was composed by Charles Bernstein, the cinematography by Jacques Aitken, and it was edited by Patrick McMahon and Rick Shane. And the stars of the movie are, of course, the legendary Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund. Well, actually, in this movie, he's not Freddy, he's just Fred Krueger. He only becomes Freddy in the later sequels. Also joining the cast includes Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, Johnny Depp in his acting role debut. Man, he looks so unrecognizable in this. I mean, you know, Johnny Depp has been known for playing weird, wacky, eccentric characters, but in this movie, he's actually playing just a normal, regular teenager. Even though in this movie he's not... when this movie came out in 84, he actually was about maybe 20, 21 years old, but he is playing a teenager. Also joining the cast includes Amanda Wyss, Ronee, Blakley, Nick Corey, Leslie Hoffman, Joseph Whipp, the guy who would voice Roger Rabbit and a few of the other characters in the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit himself, Charles Fleischer. We also have Lynn Shaye, who I kind of remember her from the Hellraiser movies. Mimi Craven, who's of course the wife of Wes Craven, and she's been in a whole slew full of horror films in the past. Let's see, rounding out the cast, we have Jack Shea, Ed Cole, Sandy Lipton, David Andrews, Jeff Levine, Donna Woodrum, Paul Grenier, Ash Adams, Don Hanna, Shashawnee Hall, Brian Reese, Carol Pritikin, Kathi Gibbs, John Richard Peterson, Chris Tashima, and Antonia Yannouli. Sure, Wes Craven has dabbled with a few horror projects predating this one, like as I've mentioned before. The Hills Have Eyes, The Last House on the Left, which is also very great, very underrated horror films. But these were basically independent films that never gave him that notoriety. Sure, these two movies made him a dependable, very prominent, important horror film director, but they never really put him at the top of the field. But A Nightmare on Elm Street was the movie that really solidified his name in the annals of great horror directors like John Carpenter, George A. Romero, and David Cronenberg. A Nightmare on Elm Street also marked the dawning of a new terrifying horror villain named Freddy Krueger, who of course was only just known as Fred in this. He's not Freddy. He's Freddy, like, maybe by the time you get to either Freddy's Revenge or Dream Warriors, that's when he becomes Freddy. But in this movie, he's just Fred. And this Freddy Krueger is one hell of a terrifying villain. I mean, he's a creepy, demonic entity who sports an unkempt red and green striped shirt, a horribly disfigured visage that's all burnt. He's got, of course, the gloves with blades on its fingers. And his motive is to catch teenagers in their dreams, stalk them, play horrifying mind games with them, and then kill them in the most brutal, most vile, most disgusting ways, which are both very practical and effective, but nonetheless sick, cerebral, and sadistic, and visceral. Let's just say Freddy Krueger is not a person to make your dreams come true, but your nightmares a reality. Now, according to this movie, the actual inspiration for people dying in their dreams actually comes from a real psychosomatic incident that happened during the Killing Fields era in Cambodia during the mid-70s into the 80s, where a lot of people, there has been a lot of mysterious deaths from people actually dying in nightmares, due to the heavy trauma that was happening at the time. And there's a lot of people who actually suffer from the fates of post-traumatic stress disorder who actually die from their nightmares because of the horrors and the blood and the carnage that they had seen during their runs of the mills as soldiers, fighting and seeing a lot of death, seeing a lot of carnage. Well, it's sure to garner a lot of nightmares once you leave. Once you leave the war fields, you're going to encounter these kind of things. And unfortunately, out of unfortunate circumstances, people sometimes do die in their nightmares. A lot of people have had a lot of reports about people dying in their nightmares. So the whole thing about kids dying in their nightmares was the inspiration for these tragic incidences that happen. It's a scary thought. And also not very pleasant either. But then again, this movie is anything but pleasant. I mean, duh. It's a fucking horror film. What do you expect? So the story of Freddy Krueger is that before he became this dream stalker, this horrific demonic creature who will kill you in the most brutal, vile, disgusting ways. Well, he wasn't exactly a nice guy when he was alive. Before he became the dream stalker, he was a horrible person. He was a child murderer. And it was reported that he killed 20 kids. I don't know if they actually used the knife hands, but then again, we don't know. But yeah, unfortunately, he was a child murderer. He was arrested, but then he was released from jail because of some kind of technical loophole that happened in court. So then he was acquitted, he was released, and the residents within the area said that, if the court can't do anything about it, all gloves come off. If the court won't give him justice, by God, we will take him in our own hands. So now this child murderer is walking around free, but the civilians to where he lived decided to just take their matters into their own hands, burn him alive, and that he'll go away forever, and he won't be harassing anyone anymore. Or so we thought. You see, now Freddy Krueger has cleverly found his way into the dreams of unsuspecting teenagers, of the parents who burned him, and to kill them while they're sleeping. So, you thought that his reign of terror happened when he was dead? You're fucking wrong. He is back. And he's in your dreams. And if you have teenagers, he will kill you. And maybe it doesn't even matter if you're a teenager or not. He'll go after anybody. After all, it's fun, isn't it? Fun to kill people, huh? Huh? You disfigured, ugly mother fudger. But the thing about Freddy Krueger is he has a lot of unorthodox, effective, vile, and as much as I don't condone murder, I do have to say that his strategies and his methods are quite effective. Sometimes even a little bit comical, but in a dark sense. See, the thing also too about Freddy Krueger is that he always seems to usually like to play mind games before killing you. And he'll even sometimes drop the odd one-liner here or there. Just to keep the narrative going. So it's not a full-fledged horror film, but also he throws in some few dark comedy in this movie. There is a little bit of dark comedy in this movie, but very dark comedy. Remember, folks, horror film. So it's going to be dark. There is nothing saccharine or sweet about this movie. Of course, for all you Nightmare on Elm Street fans, I'm telling you something you probably already know. Or probably heard a million times. I'm just gaining my opinions. Don't like it? Go someplace else. Freddy Krueger has become, to many, as one of the most identifiable movie villain icons in the slasher film era of this time, from guys like Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Chucky, Leprechaun, Pinhead, you name it. Ghostface. Yes, besides that, Wes Craven also directed Scream in the late 90s as well. And unlike the other villains, they are more easy to avoid. If you don't want to run into Jason Voorhees, don't enroll at Camp Crystal Lake. But Freddy Krueger plays the beat to a different drum. You see, Freddy Krueger is a lot more harder to avoid. Because as much as you might try hard to fight the systems of the human body, One, two, better. Freddy's coming to you. 3, 4, better lock the door. 5, 6, lift your crucifix. 7, 8, getting too late. 9, 10, never sleep again. That's his theme song. I think I may have butchered the song. I'm sorry if I did. I'm not good with lyrics. But, yeah. You see, the thing is, like I said before, Freddy Krueger is harder to avoid because as much as you might try hard to fight the systems by consuming energy drinks, drinking lots of coffee, taking pills that will keep you awake, anything. Even if you have to drink a whole tank full of coffee, you're going to try to do everything in your power possible to stay awake all night, to stay awake for as long as possible. But however, that's not exactly a very easy thing to do because sleep is something you really simply can't escape. Sooner or later, the human body does tire out. And it's an average that the human race sleeps about an average 6 hours a day. Sure, they could sleep through long nights, but we also take little naps in between during the days too. And it's not because we're lazy, but it's because our bodies operate that way. Our bodies tell us when we're tired. And everybody needs to sleep at one point or another, whether it's during the day, whether it's during night or afternoon. I mean, the thing is if you actually go without sleep, I'm sorry to say this, but you can die. You can succumb to severe exhaustion. Sooner or later, the body starts to fade out and you will feel exhausted. All the coffee, soda, caffeine, or energy drinks in the world can stall sleep, but the body and mind eventually shut down. And if Freddy Krueger does come into your dreams, he's just going to be harder to beat. It takes a certain special someone to defeat this entity. Who? I don't know. So the story goes a little something like this. We meet teenager by the name of Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp. She's been having nightmares of a demonic entity stalking her, playing mind games, and threatening to kill her, and almost succeeding. The weird thing is that she's not the only one who has spotted this demonic creature.
Oh no.
I mean, things take a turn for the worse when one of her friends, Tina Gray, played by Amanda Wyss, was killed by this manifestation while she dreamt of him. Well, he was chasing her through a boiling room, and he almost succeeded in killing her. But somehow narrowly escaped. This was the first instance. I mean, her mother practically had to sort of shake her and wake her up. Some people say that A Nightmare on Elm Street could be, a simple case of, sleep apnea or some form of sleep apnea. And maybe these And maybe these young teenagers who have been experiencing these recurring nightmares may have that kind of thing going for them. But then, Tina would eventually invite her friends over to stay at her house. Not necessarily a sleepover, but to stay at her house because she didn't want to be alone while her parents were out. There was Nancy, there was her boyfriend named Ron Lane, played by Nick Corey, and Glenn Lance, played by Johnny Depp in his debut. Man, he looked so unrecognizable in there. I mean, he looked so normal. It didn't even sound like him either. Anyhow, as she and Ron Lane were upstairs, having a good BJ, she then eventually had a dream. No, it wasn't a wet dream. It was a dream. And Freddy Krueger eventually killed her in the most brutal fashion. He really did sink his claws into her. And then you see her levitating. She's crawling on the ceiling. Blood is all splattered all over the place. But instead when the cops show up, they're not going to say that it was Freddy Krueger. The police eventually declared this case as a homicide. But instead of saying that it was Freddy Krueger that did it, eventually Ron Lane, her boyfriend, eventually ends up getting arrested. Now, even though this Ron is an asshole, but still, we pretty much clearly knew that he wasn't the one who did that to her. Sure, he can be a jerk, but even I have to take sympathy for the poor guy. Eventually, too, even he ends up meeting his fate. So Nancy tries to convince her father, Lieutenant Thompson, played by John Saxon, that Ron is innocent, but he dismisses her about her claims that an evil being killed Tina in her sleep. As time went on, she started to unravel the truth about Krueger, his dark and unflattering history, what his motives are, and tries to find a way to stop him once and for all. And the only way to defeat him is to turn his nearly invincible powers in the dream world and bring him to the real world, where he's not so powerful, where he's just a weak, pathetic, soulless motherfucker. And that in the real world, he's just a useless piece of shit. Sure, in the dream world, he is the almighty, powerful, evil entity. But in the real world, he's weak and pathetic. I mean, there's also some scenes where she also, booby traps her house, kind of almost like Home Alone style, but let's face it, when it comes to booby trapping the houses, none can do it better than Kevin McAllister. Although she does try, and she somehow succeeds. I mean, he does get victims to the booby traps, and he falls for each one, signify that her world works differently from the dream world. In the dream world, he's the one who's playing the mind games, but in our world, he's the victim. And it just goes to show you that through every villain in a movie that's evil, whether it be an evil entity, monster, you name it, there's always going to be a weakness. All we have to do is find that weakness, take it to your advantage, and the asshole will die. I would have liked it if the ending would have had him, like, blow up in flames and have a big blast and explosions, but no. She just simply says to his face, "You're weak, you're pathetic, you're all just a dream, you're all just a manifestation in my mind. You're pathetic, you're weak, and you're a vulnerable little asshole. And I hope that you rot in hell." And poof, he disappears. So I thought the ending would have been a little more anticlimactic. And then we cut to a next scene where she's greeted out the door by her mother, who previously, last time we saw her, she was in bed with Freddy Krueger. No, they were not having a bonk, but he actually burned her to ashes, and then she sunk below the mattresses. Oh, and she's giving up drinking. She greets her daughter goodbye, and then all of her friends who have met their fate. We have Tina, Ron, Glenn. They're all back. They drive off to school, and then when the convertible lits, it comes in the form of Freddy's patterned striped shirt, with the red and green stripes. The car goes off on its own. Nancy and the rest of the gang start screaming and saying, "Mother, do something!" Mother's just, Mrs. Thompson's just waving at them. And then she gets carried off by some invincible force. And I guess this prompts up for a sequel. All the makings of a sequel is there. Of course, that would come out next year, which would be, of course, Freddy's Revenge, Part 2, which you could actually, believe it or not, you could actually watch it for free on YouTube. It's on YouTube for free. I can't believe it. But, so Freddy kind of had to learn his lesson the hard way, that in his world, he is powerful, but in our world, he is weak. The situations each character endures is what makes the movie all the more creepy. Let's face it, when you're asleep, you're defenseless, oblivious, and vulnerable. And with that in mind, the victims of Krueger are the perfect targets. Of course, sleep is mandatory in our everyday lives. So whether you sleep more during the day or at night, all I can say is Freddy will be waiting. In other slasher films, the victims are likely to come get you, but Freddy takes his method to another approach. Instead of the villains coming to get you, it's the victims that come to Freddy. He'll wait until you doze off, then he'll attack. Another trait that makes Freddy so significant is his sarcasm that was suggested by the man behind the demon himself, Robert Englund. Okay, maybe in this version, the first movie, Freddy doesn't really throw too many one-liners, though he does have some levels of dark humor in his role, but it wasn't as overkill as it would be like in the later movies. Probably by the time you get to Dream Master. His humor is a witty tongue-in-cheek banter that can provide some levels of laughter while he slashes teens left, right, and center. He eventually would do more of those one-liners in later films. Now, when it comes to performances, I'm not expecting very much. I mean, it is a horror film, after all, it's a slasher film, so there's going to be not so great acting. But then again, this wasn't going to pick up Oscars. And I don't think it had any reasons or any apologies why it shouldn't. I'm not going to say that the acting was terrible. There was some good stuff, especially from the leading character, Heather Langenkamp. She was actually pretty good. Robert Englund as Freddy, just legend. Nothing more than I can say. But yes, the acting is pretty much the weakness in this movie. Now, I wasn't expecting Shakespeare or Hemingway. And for the most record, most horror films never try to write scripts for anything life-changing or intelligent. But some of the performances here were kind of just downright pathetic. The worst of the ensemble, I would have to say, was Ronee Blakley as Nancy's mother, Marge Thompson. And the sad part about it is that Ronee Blakley is an Oscar-nominated actress. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in the 1975 movie Nashville. But in this movie, she doesn't really have much to do except being an alcoholic. And she only just kind of like has this part where she's telling the whole story about Freddy Krueger, but she actually wanders around a lot and looks dumbfounded most of the time. So I gotta say, she was really the weakest character in this movie. I'm sorry to say. Honorable mention, and I know this is gonna upset a lot of people, but Johnny Depp's performance as Nancy's boyfriend, Glenn Lance, also was not really that good. I know all you Johnny Depp fans out there are probably going to want to throw something at me. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I offended your precious little Johnny boy. But Johnny Depp was just not really that good in this movie. I'll give him a pass. Because I'm a nice guy. I have a heart. I'm going to give him a pass. Maybe I'll just give him a C+. Because I'm a good guy. I mean, I'll give him a break because it was his acting debut. But he's too much of a rookie here, and it shows. He doesn't have much character. He doesn't have much going from him except for being a generic teenager who sometimes rebels against the systems. And he ends up being just another one of Freddy's victims. And boy, does he die a horrific death. I mean, he gets sunk below the bed sheets where he accidentally fell asleep, and all of a sudden his blood and guts are spilling everywhere like Mount Vesuvius. I mean, it was like a big volcanic eruption of blood. I mean, he was scattered everywhere. I mean, it's fine that everybody wants a little bit of Johnny Depp, but that is ridiculous. But yeah, he really met his fate in this. And even though his death scene was effective, I can't say the same about his acting. Way too rookie here. I mean, sure, he became a mega breakout superstar later in his career and became the big cheese. You know, by the time you get around to the 90s, into the 2000s, his career would take off. Just not here. So I'm sorry to say. I know the acting was overall the weaker point of the movie. It's still a delightful film to watch, especially on Halloween night. And, yeah, it's always good that during the Halloween season to watch as much horror films as you can possibly can. And you know, I really, really, truly think this is a good movie. Now, make no mistake about it. And of course, you know, I'm probably asking too much when it comes to the acting, but still, I gotta say it: the acting was weak. Did it get better in the later films? I think it pretty much kind of stayed status quo. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. Anyhow, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984 an 8 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.